The woman froze for a moment. She couldn't believe this was happening. Handcuffed? Right here? For wearing a white t-shirt and being black? Anger was boiling over her now, but she kept her voice steady. "You have no right to do this. I did nothing wrong. This is illegal." She began to recite basic laws about civil rights and limits on police power. But her words only added fuel to the fire for the two policemen. Oh, now she's lecturing the police, opposing an officer in the performance of his duties. The police took the woman's verbal resistance as a direct challenge to their authority. "I demand that you stop immediately," the woman said, her voice firm, but she had no intention of physically resisting. She knew that would only make the situation worse. A policeman circled around behind her. She felt his rough hands grip her wrists, forcing them behind her back. Then the cold clang of metal echoed dryly in the dead silence of the restaurant. The handcuffs tightened around her wrists, the cold metal cutting into her flesh. It was more than physical pain. It was the ultimate humiliation, a flagrant violation of her dignity and freedom. But these two policemen made a fatal mistake. They had no idea the true identity of the woman they had just insulted and handcuffed. They had no idea that their blindly prejudiced actions were about to spell the end of their careers and possibly their freedom. The truth is about to come out, and when it does, the balance of power will tilt dramatically. The two who have just been so aggressive in their dealings will soon be on their knees begging for mercy. What happens next? Who is this woman really? And what price will the two racist policemen pay? Join us as we navigate this dramatic and unexpected story. Night falls over the city, draped in a black velvet cloak, dotted with distant stars and neon lights from skyscrapers. The traffic continues to buzz below, but a luxurious calm sets in this upscale neighborhood. Amidst the boutiques and art galleries stands the Gilded Spoon, an oasis of sophistication and fine dining. Stepping through the heavy oak doors, guests seem to be lost in another world. The air is filled with the delicate scent of expensive spices, fresh flowers in crystal vases, and something very special, the scent of wealth and class. Warm yellow light from the Art Deco crystal chandeliers shines down, creating shimmering streaks of light on the smooth white tablecloths. Bohemian crystal wine glasses are carefully polished, sparkling under the candlelight placed on each table, ready to receive the finest wines. The soft, melodious jazz music flows from the hidden sound system, enough to create a relaxing atmosphere, but not disturb small conversations. The sound of knives and forks gently hitting high-class porcelain plates, the sound of glasses clinking together in soft toasts, all blend together to create a symphony of luxury and elegance. The Gilded Spoon's clientele was, as expected, overwhelmingly white. The men in impeccably tailored suits, the ladies in elegant dresses, and the fine jewelry exuded a quiet pride. They spoke in low tones, their gestures elegant, each one conscious of his or her status and the need to maintain a certain standard of conduct here. The atmosphere was somewhat exclusive, a subtle separation from the hustle and bustle of the outside world. It was in this seemingly perfect and immutable setting that Eleanor Vance's appearance became an odd note, though at first no one really noticed. Eleanor Vance, a black woman in her 40s, chose a table tucked away in the corner of the restaurant. Her face was intelligent and sharp, with deep, dark brown eyes, though tonight she looked a little tired after a stressful week at the Attorney General's office. She was well-proportioned, not too tall, but exuded a steady confidence from within. What made her different, in the eyes of some people tonight, was not her skin color, but her surprisingly simple outfit compared to the surrounding scene. A plain white t-shirt, although the high-quality cotton material could be seen, but it was still just a t-shirt, combined with straight-leg black trousers and flat-soled soft leather loafers. No fancy jewelry, just an elegant watch on her wrist and a simple leather handbag placed on the chair opposite. The choice of outfit was deliberate. After long days of wearing power suits, dealing with complex cases, stressful meetings, and political pressures, Eleanor was just craving a relaxing Friday evening. She had planned to meet an old friend, but that friend called off at the last minute. Instead of going home, she decided to treat herself to a quiet dinner at the Gilded Spoon, a place she had been to several times for official events, but had never had the chance to experience as a casual, anonymous diner. She sat there, completely relaxed and at ease. Back straight, she skimmed through the last few work emails on her tablet, occasionally sipping water. She didn't seem shy or out of place in the luxurious surroundings. Her eyes occasionally glanced up, observing the people around her with the gentle curiosity of someone used to analyzing people and situations. She saw couples enjoying romantic dates, business groups discussing business over a glass of strong wine, families celebrating a special occasion, a microcosm of success and peace. A thought of contrast crossed her mind. These people probably never faced the injustices and prejudices that so many of the people she represented endured every day. But she quickly dismissed it. Tonight, she just wanted peace. At that moment, the restaurant door opened again, but this time, it was not the elegantly dressed diners. Two figures in police uniforms entered, disrupting the delicate harmony of the space. The first, Officer Miller, was in his late 50s, plump, with a red face and deep lines around his eyes and mouth, and he had the smug, somewhat tired look of a man who had been doing this job too long and believed he had seen it all. His eyes were sharp and searching, scanning the restaurant as if searching for something unusual. Behind him was Officer Davis, much younger, perhaps in his early 20s, tall and thin, with a somewhat childish face that tried to look tough, imitating the superiority of his older colleague. It seemed like they had just dealt with some minor incident outside, maybe a complaint about a parked car or an argument on the sidewalk, and decided to check in inside the restaurant as a matter of power. Their gait was a little swaggering, their hard-soled shoes clicking on the marble floor with a dry sound that was out of place against the soft jazz music. A few diners near the door frowned slightly, but quickly looked away, avoiding the policeman's gaze. Their presence brought a sudden tension, a reminder of the real world beyond these ornate walls. Miller's gaze swept over the expensive suits and evening gowns, then stopped abruptly when he caught sight of Eleanor Vance in the corner. He paused for a second, his thick brows furrowing. A black woman in a white t-shirt sitting alone in the Gilded Spoon on a Friday night? In his brain, programmed by ingrained prejudices, this did not fit the normal order. Miller nudged Davis in the side, his gaze flicking to Eleanor. Davis followed her gaze, and the same expression, a mixture of surprise and suspicion, came across the younger woman's face. They exchanged a knowing glance, knowing without words what the other was thinking. The peace Eleanor had sought was about to be shattered. Like two predators sniffing out something out of their territory, Miller and Davis began to move, not toward the front desk or the manager, but straight toward the secluded table where Eleanor sat. Their footsteps now carried a cold determination, drawing the attention of the diners sitting nearby. Some conversations died down. Curious, even anxious eyes turned toward them and the silent black woman. The air became thick. Miller stopped just in front of Eleanor's desk, his shadow falling across the tabletop, obscuring the warm candlelight. Davis stood slightly behind her, his hands clasped behind his back in a ready stance. Miller did not greet her, nor did he state his reason for calling, his voice dry and undisguisedly condescending. "Good evening, ma'am. We need to see your identification." Eleanor looked up, her eyes still calm, but with a flash of wariness. She set the tablet down on the table and looked straight at Miller. "Is there a problem, officers?" Her voice was even, no fear, just legitimate curiosity. "Just checking," Miller replied curtly, but his eyes lingered on her white t-shirt, then around the fancy restaurant, as if searching for some absurd connection. What are you doing here alone?" "I was waiting for you and reading something while I waited," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice calm. She reached into her purse, pulled out her driver's license, and handed it to Miller. "Here are my papers." Miller took the license, glanced at the photo, then back at Eleanor, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Eleanor Vance." He muttered, deliberately dragging out his voice. "Are you sure this is yours?" He turned the license over as if it were a fake. Davis, seeing Miller's attitude, chimed in. "You don't look like someone who frequents places like this." The remark carried a clear derogatory implication about social status based on skin color and clothing. Eleanor felt a hot anger begin to simmer in her chest, but she fought it back. Years of experience as a lawyer and prosecutor had taught her that keeping her cool was her best weapon in situations like this. "I don't understand what you mean," she said, her voice starting to harden. "This is a public restaurant, and I'm a customer. Do you have any legitimate reason to question me? Or is this just because I don't look like the others here?" Her blunt question seemed to irritate Miller. Eleanor's confidence and unflinching demeanor contradicted his image of an outlier who should have been afraid. "Don't raise your voice to me," Miller growled, his voice rising, drawing more attention. "We've received reports of a suspicious person in the area who resembles you." It was clearly a clumsy lie, an excuse made up on the spot. "What tip? What identification?" Eleanor asked immediately, challenging his lie. "Can you give me more details? What is the case number?" Miller grew increasingly frustrated at being cornered. He had no answers. Rather than admit his mistake, he escalated. "Okay, you're disturbing the peace. Your behavior is suspicious." He turned to Davis, his voice commanding. "Davis, check her for a criminal record." Davis awkwardly pulled out his mini walkie-talkie, but he also clearly felt that the situation was going too far. He glanced at Miller, then back at Eleanor, who was still sitting upright, her gaze unwavering. At this moment, the restaurant manager, a Frenchman named Jean-Pierre Dubois, hurried over. He looked sharp in his well-tailored manager's uniform, but his face was full of worry and awkwardness. "Officers, Mrs. Vance, is there anything I can do for you?" He tried to keep his voice calm, but his hand kept fiddling with his tie. "Mrs. Vance is our customer. I'm sure there's no problem." Miller whirled around, glaring at the manager. "This is police business, Mr. Dubois. Please step aside. We suspect this woman of being involved in an incident." He waved the manager away, completely ignoring his assurances. Dubois, though annoyed, was clearly more afraid of getting involved with the police than of protecting his client to the end. He took a few steps back, his expression helpless. The manager's weak intervention and quick retreat only made Miller feel more confident in his authority. He turned back to Eleanor, his eyes now filled with anger and determination to teach her a lesson. "Okay, that's enough," Miller said loudly. "You're under investigation. Stand up. Put your hands behind your back." Eleanor froze for a moment. She couldn't believe this was happening. Handcuffed? Right here? For wearing a white t-shirt and being black? Anger was boiling over her now, but she kept her voice from shaking. "You have no right to do this. I did nothing wrong. This is illegal." She began to recite basic laws about civil rights and limits on police power, but her words only added fuel to Miller's fire. "Oh, now you're lecturing the police? Opposing an officer in the line of duty?" He took Eleanor's verbal protest as a direct challenge to his authority. He gestured to Davis. Davis hesitated for a moment, looking around at the eyes that were on them, but Miller's sharp glare made him hesitate. He stepped forward, pulling the shiny handcuffs from the holster at his waist. "I demand that you stop immediately," Eleanor said, her voice firm, but she had no intention of physically resisting. She knew that would only make things worse. Davis circled behind her. Eleanor felt the young officer's rough hands grip her wrists, forcing them behind her back. Then the cold clang of metal echoed dryly in the dead silence of the restaurant. The handcuffs tightened around her wrists, the cold metal cutting into her flesh. It was more than physical pain. It was the ultimate humiliation, a flagrant violation of her dignity and freedom. The entire restaurant held its breath. The jazz music seemed to stop. All eyes were on the unbelievable sight. A black woman, modestly dressed, handcuffed in the middle of one of the city's most exclusive restaurants by two white police officers. A few shook their heads, a few took out their phones, pretending to text, but actually recording the scene. But most just watched in silence, their faces showing discomfort and indignation, but some vague fear or indifference preventing them from speaking up. This complicit silence only added to Eleanor's sense of isolation and injustice. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising anger and humiliation, and looked straight at Miller, not a trace of fear, only cold contempt and steely determination. She knew what she had to do next. Miller smiled smugly. He had the situation under control, had taught this arrogant black woman her place. He gestured to Davis. "Okay, take her to the car." Davis grabbed Eleanor's arm, trying to pull her up from her chair. The surrounding diners parted, creating an awkward path. Humiliation was written all over their faces, but no one dared to intervene. Eleanor could feel their eyes on her. Pity, curiosity, contempt. But just as Miller and Davis were about to escort her past the rows of elegant tables, under the gazes of dozens of people, Eleanor spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear, sharp, and powerful, resonating strangely in the heavy silence of the restaurant. "I'm Eleanor Vance." She paused, long enough for the name to sink in. Then she continued, each word like a hammer blow to the complacency of the two policemen. "The Attorney General of this state." She looked straight into Miller's eyes, her gaze razor-sharp, no longer tired but with the cold seriousness of one holding supreme judicial power. "And you," she emphasized, "have just made a very serious mistake." A moment of silence fell over the Gilded Spoon. The jazz music had stopped. A customer's knife and fork clattered. All activity seemed to have stopped. The instantaneous reaction on Miller and Davis's faces was a sight to behold. The smugness, the condescension, the aggression were gone in an instant, as if blown away by a cold wind. In their place was utter shock, disbelief, and then, as the meaning of the words began to sink in, pure terror. Miller's red face turned pale, then white as a sheet. Cold sweat began to break out on his forehead and temples. His eyes widened, staring at Eleanor as if he had seen a ghost. The swagger in his posture disappeared, and his shoulders slumped. Davis was worse. The young cop's mouth dropped open, his eyes wide with panic. He stammered, "What? What? What did you say?" His hand that had been holding Eleanor's arm dropped as if he'd been electrocuted. The handcuffs on Eleanor's hands now seemed to radiate a terrible heat. Miller was speechless, his throat dry. He stared at Eleanor, searching for some sign that she was lying, making things up to get away. But there was none. The calm, the unshakable confidence, and most importantly, the look of power in those eyes could not be faked. A chill ran down Miller's spine. He knew he had done something terrible. "Check your systems," Eleanor said, her voice still cold, but now with a new layer of meaning, a command. "Or call your duty commander, immediately." She glanced at Miller's name tag, then Davis. "Officer Miller, badge number 714. Officer Davis, badge number 882. Tell them you have Attorney General Eleanor Vance detained at the Gilded Spoon on suspicion of disorderly conduct." She repeated the lame excuse Miller had made up. Panic gripped the two officers. Miller pulled the walkie-talkie from his belt, fumbling with his hand to press the call button. His voice was shaky and broken as he tried to report the situation to his superiors. Davis stood frozen in place, his face pale, sweat streaming down his cheeks, his eyes looking at Eleanor with fear and pleading. It took only a few seconds over the radio to confirm. There was dead silence on the other end, then shrill screams, urgent orders. Miller's expression grew more desperate. He switched off the radio, his hands still shaking, and then, a 180-degree turn of events. Miller nearly collapsed. He rushed toward Eleanor, his other hand fumbling in his pocket for the handcuff keys. "Sir, Attorney General, my God, we are so sorry. We didn't know. We had no idea." His voice was full of false guilt and utter fear. There was a click as the handcuffs were released, leaving 2 red marks on Eleanor's wrists. Davis hurried forward, bowing deeply, stammering meaningless apologies. "I'm sorry, Attorney General. It's just a misunderstanding. A terrible misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Eleanor repeated, her voice now icy. She stood slowly, adjusting her now slightly wrinkled white t-shirt. She rubbed her wrists, her eyes never leaving the 2 officers' pale, frightened faces. "You insulted me, slandered me, and handcuffed me in front of so many people because of the color of my skin and the clothes I wore. That's not a misunderstanding, Officer Miller. That's prejudice, abuse of power, racism." Desperate, pleading words began to pour out of Miller and Davis's mouths. "Please, please forgive us. We were just following procedure. We have families. Please don't ruin our careers." They began to throw the blame around, trying to deflect their responsibility. "We just saw you. You didn't look like..." Miller trailed off, realizing the more he said, the more wrong he was becoming. Eleanor did not respond to their pleas. She only looked at them with a stern, unforgiving gaze. Her silence was more terrifying than any scolding. Meanwhile, the people around them began to whisper. The initial fear had given way to amazement, curiosity, and for some, glee at the sight of the 2 men who had been so arrogant, now cowering in fear. Cell phones were now openly held up to record the scene. Manager Dubois stood nearby, frozen, his face drained of color. He knew he had made a huge mistake in not defending his client more vigorously. He had chosen safety over principle, and now the consequences could be dire, and not just for the 2 cops. Eleanor turned away from the 2 shaking officers. She looked straight at Manager Dubois. "Mr. Dubois, I need to use your phone." Her voice was calm, but no one questioned the order. The tables had turned. The real power hidden beneath the plain t-shirt was now revealed. Less than 15 minutes later, the atmosphere at the Gilded Spoon became more tense than ever. Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer and closer, then stopped abruptly right in front of the restaurant. Not 1, but 3 patrol cars and an unmarked black sedan. The restaurant door opened again, this time revealing much higher-ranking figures. Leading the way was Captain John Riley, the immediate supervisor of the precinct, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a hard face, now even more tense and embarrassed. Behind him was Deputy Chief Mark Jenkins, a powerful figure in the police department, his face serious and worried. They walked quickly toward Eleanor, who was standing talking to an assistant she had summoned. "Attorney General Vance," Captain Riley spoke first, his voice full of apologies. "I just got the news. I don't know what to say. On behalf of the police department, I deeply apologize to you for this unacceptable incident." Deputy Chief Jenkins chimed in, his handshake firm but his palms cold. "Attorney General, we deeply regret the actions of Officers Miller and Davis. Their actions were inexcusable and do not reflect the spirit or policies of the department." Eleanor just nodded slightly, her expression still solemn. "Thank you for coming, Captain Riley, Deputy Chief Jenkins. I trust you understand the seriousness of the situation." The 2 police commanders' eyes then turned to Miller and Davis, who were huddled in a corner, heads bowed, shaking like leaves. Riley and Jenkins' eyes were filled with disappointment and anger. Without a word, Captain Riley signaled for the other 2 officers to follow. In the restaurant lobby, in front of Eleanor, the restaurant staff, and the remaining diners, Miller and Davis were ordered to surrender their weapons, badges, and handcuffs. It was a powerful and poignant image, a symbol of power stripped from the very place where they had so flagrantly abused it. The two former officers were escorted out in heavy silence and mixed looks, contempt, gloating, and a little sad pity. Soon after, investigators from the Internal Affairs Division of the Police Department arrived. They began their investigation in a professional manner, but the atmosphere was clearly extremely tense. They sealed off the dining area where the incident occurred, took photos of the scene, and began taking statements. Eleanor's testimony was carefully and meticulously recorded. She recounted the entire incident objectively, from the moment she entered the restaurant, to the words and actions of Miller and Davis, to the moment she was forced to reveal her identity. She emphasized the racial bias and obvious abuse of power in their actions. Dubois, the manager, was also interviewed. He was cooperative but clearly terrified, trying to downplay his role and his lack of commitment to protecting his customers. Several diners who had filmed the video or were brave enough to stay were also invited to provide testimony and video evidence. The amateur cell phone footage, along with the restaurant's security camera footage, became indisputable evidence. If Miller and Davis had turned on their body cams, as required by law, the audio and video would have strengthened their case. As the internal investigation was underway at the restaurant, news of the incident began to spread at breakneck speed. Several diners quickly called the press or posted information on social media. Within an hour, major news outlets had picked up the bombshell story. Sensational headlines began appearing online, setting the stage for the evening news and the next day's front pages. State Attorney General handcuffed for suspected disorder at upscale restaurant. Shocking wrongful arrest, racism, or abuse of power. 2 police officers suspended after arresting Black Attorney General. The white t-shirt and deadly prejudice, the Eleanor Vance story. A wave of public outrage erupted. People expressed anger at the police's racist behavior and abuse of power. Civil rights organizations and social activists spoke out in unison, demanding a transparent investigation, severe punishment for those who violated the law, and, most importantly, real reforms within the police force to address systemic racism. Small protests began to form outside the police department and city hall. Huge pressure was placed on the police department and local authorities. The city's mayor was forced to hold an emergency press conference, expressing deep concern and pledging to get to the bottom of the truth. The police department also issued an official statement, affirming that it would conduct an internal investigation thoroughly, fairly, and without cover-ups. Amid the media storm and public pressure, Eleanor Vance remained calm and professional. The next day, she held a press conference in her office. Standing in front of dozens of cameras and microphones, she did not appear to be a pitiful victim. Instead, she spoke firmly and clearly. "What happened last night at the Gilded Spoon was not just an attack on me personally," she said, her voice echoing throughout the conference room. "It was a painful manifestation of a persistent and pervasive problem in our society. Racial bias and abuse of power by those entrusted with the responsibility of protecting the law. I am fortunate to have a platform and a voice to let the truth be known. But how many others, who are not so fortunate, have suffered and continue to suffer in silence?" She affirmed her faith in the legal system, but also stressed that faith must be accompanied by accountability. "I have formally requested a full and independent criminal investigation into the actions of Officer Miller and Officer Davis. To ensure objectivity and avoid any conflict of interest, I will not directly oversee this case. However, the Attorney General's office will closely monitor the proceedings to ensure that justice is served." After the press conference, back in her private office, facing the pile of paperwork waiting for her, Eleanor allowed herself to feel the full weight of the incident. She felt tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from the weight of reality. Her personal anger was still there, simmering beneath her professional veneer. But above all, there was a deep sadness at the realization that, despite her position of power, she could have been a victim of racism simply because of the color of her skin and the white t-shirt she wore. The incident, painful as it was, only strengthened her resolve to use her power to fight for a more just society so that no one else would have to go through what she had. The investigation had only just begun, but the real battle was much longer. The internal investigation and the criminal investigation proceeded in parallel, but quickly reached an inevitable conclusion. The evidence was overwhelming and incontrovertible. Attorney General Eleanor Vance's consistent testimony, the testimony of objective witnesses, the restaurant's security camera footage that captured the entire incident from start to finish, and most importantly, Miller and Davis's own stuttering, frightened confessions during their initial interrogations when they realized the true identity of the man they had just handcuffed. The results of the internal investigation were released in advance. Officer Miller and Officer Davis were found to have committed numerous serious violations of the police department's policies, including abuse of power, racial discrimination, unlawful arrest, and false reporting. The decision to terminate both officers was made almost immediately, ending their police careers. But the fallout didn't stop there. Based on the investigation and pressure from the public and the Attorney General's office, although Eleanor had recused herself from direct supervision, the district attorney's office decided to file criminal charges against Miller and Davis. The charges included unlawful arrest, abuse of power, and in a more dramatic move, prosecutors added a racially motivated hate crime aggravating factor based on the former officer's disparaging remarks and discriminatory behavior. The Miller and Davis trials attracted a great deal of public and media attention. The courtroom was packed. The prosecution presented a strong case with video evidence, testimony from Eleanor, who appeared as a witness and remained professional and objective, testimony from other witnesses at the restaurant, and testimony from experts on police procedures and ethics. The defense attorneys for Miller and Davis had a difficult time. They tried to argue that this was just an error of judgment, an unfortunate misunderstanding in the heat of duty. They tried to paint a picture of two dedicated officers with years of service, Miller, or young, inexperienced officers influenced by their superiors, Davis. They emphasized the fact that the two defendants immediately apologized and expressed remorse. But these defenses were weakened by the overwhelming evidence of condescension, racial slurs, and unjustified handcuffing. Miller and Davis's demeanor in court did little to help matters. Miller appeared bitter and resentful, sometimes muttering obscenities, claiming he was the victim of a political witch hunt. Davis was visibly distraught, weeping and apologizing repeatedly, but his belated remorse did not erase the crime he had committed. After several days of intense trial, it didn't take long for the jury to reach a verdict. Both Miller and Davis were found guilty on all major charges. The day of the sentencing was a particularly solemn one. The judge, an older man with a stern face, read the verdict in a clear voice, emphasizing each word. He spoke of the trust the public places in law enforcement and the terrible betrayal when that trust is broken by those who wear the badge. The defendants' actions that evening were not only an affront to Attorney General Vance personally, the judge said, looking directly at Miller and Davis. They were an affront to the uniform you wore, to the oath you swore, and to the very foundations of justice you were charged with protecting. Your targeting of a citizen based on the color of his or her skin and appearance, your abuse of the power you have given to discriminate, is intolerable in a civilized, law-abiding society. He stressed that the sentence must send a clear message. No one, including the police, is above the law. Prejudice and abuse of power will be punished. Result: former Officer Miller and former Officer Davis were each sentenced to 4 years in prison. The verdict was met with mixed reactions. Civil rights activists and many members of the public expressed satisfaction, calling it an important victory for justice, though there was bitterness about the fact that the case might not have been treated so harshly had the victim not been the state attorney general. The police department issued perfunctory statements about learning from this experience and pledging to increase anti-discrimination training. For Eleanor Vance, the verdict brings a sense of relief, but not complete closure. She knows that holding two individuals accountable is only a small part of a larger picture. The fight against systemic racism, against ingrained prejudice, and against the abuse of power is still a long and arduous one. The story ends with Eleanor Vance, weeks after the trial, sitting in her office late one evening. The streetlights cast shadows of tall buildings against the glass of her office windows. She looks out the window, not with the weariness she felt that fateful night at the Gilded Spoon, but with a new determination, a deeper awareness of her responsibilities and the gravity of her position. The personal case is over, but it has engraved in her mind a lesson about the fragility of justice and the importance of never stopping the fight. The simple white t-shirt that day has inadvertently become a symbol of a larger confrontation, a reminder that appearance does not define a person's worth, and that true power lies in defending dignity and fairness for all. The fight continues, and she is ready for it. The final message resonates in the audience's mind. Standing up against injustice is everyone's responsibility. Silence can mean complicity, and hope, however fragile, always exists in the quest for a more just world. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.